As real estate agents Elise Stern, Weidong Zhao, and his clients toured the nearly $7 million mansion located at 50 Old Colony Road in Toronto, Canada, they couldn't help but be amazed. The 12,000 square foot home was immaculate, complete with 6 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, multiple pools, a tennis court, and underground parking for 6 cars. The Sherman estate could easily be anyone's dream home. That's why the homeowner's real estate agent couldn't help but be annoyed by the sick prank she was seeing. The prospective buyers and their agent weren't too pleased either. Who would prop up 2 mannequins in a grotesque scene by the pool while they were trying to sell a home? As the group moved closer, reality sunk in. They weren't mannequins at all. It was Barry and Honey Sherman, 2 of the wealthiest people in North America and the owners of the property. At 11:44 a.m., Elise Stern, the Sherman's real estate agent, frantically called 911, telling dispatchers, "Somebody killed my clients. They're dead." That was on Friday, December 15, 2017, and today investigators are no closer to solving the billionaire couple's untimely deaths. As investigators dug into the Shermans' past, they uncovered family drama teeming with grudges, accusations, and rumors, entanglements involving less than reputable business partners, and numerous enemies in the pharmaceutical industry. There were even conspiracies surrounding the mob and the pandemic. But who would really want a couple in their 70s dead? Well, it turns out, a lot. I'm Brooke. This is Armchair Investigator, and in today's episode, we'll be diving into the lives and deaths of Barry and Honey Sherman. I think it's important that we first talk about who the Shermans were. They both had interesting backgrounds, and neither came from money. They were truly self-made millionaires and eventually billionaires. In the late 70s, Barry founded Apotex, one of Canada's largest generic drug companies. He and Honey used their money to become major philanthropists, donating generously to charities, cultural institutions, and Jewish causes.
So I don't think any person can be a happy person if he's successful in life and doesn't give back to the community. So I would encourage all youngsters to get involved and always make it the focus of their lives to participate in society and to give back. It's a source of great satisfaction. It's UJA that has enabled us to do so much for so many. It's not something that anyone can do on his own, but
Right.
When you combine our resources and our energies through an organization like UJA, there's nothing we can't accomplish. And
Sure.
For decades, Honey and I have both felt the commitment to do what we could for the community. And we decided to divide up the responsibility. She does all the community service work. She's been chair of just about everything. And and my time is better spent doing what I can to try to earn money so I can write the checks. So that's how we've divided it.
Fair and equitable.
Fair and equitable.
Born on February 25, 1942, Barry was raised in Toronto by his parents Herbert and Sarah Sherman. From a young age, Barry already had a mind for business. His father ran a zipper manufacturing firm and even owned a small portion of it. As a young boy, Barry would tag along with his father to help sort and count zippers. At just 10 years old, Barry's life would drastically change when their father suddenly died of a massive heart attack. To make ends meet, Barry's mother Sarah went to work as an occupational therapist and rented out rooms in their house to earn extra money. Due to his chaotic home life, Barry spent as much time as he could with his best friend, Joel Ulster. After high school, Barry enrolled at the University of Toronto, pursuing a degree in engineering science, where he graduated at the top of his class. He then enrolled at MIT in Massachusetts, where he would obtain a master's and a PhD. Barry's focus was on satellite technology. His sights were set on working for NASA. Little did Barry know, that was all about to change. You see, during the summers, Barry worked as a delivery truck driver for Empire Laboratories, a generic drug distribution company owned by his uncle Lou Winter. It was an easy way to make money for college, but not anything Barry took seriously. until his Aunt Beverly, Lou Winter's wife, was diagnosed with leukemia. That's when Barry stepped up and started to take on a more executive role at his uncle's company. And he had a knack for it, even securing an important contract while figuring out ways to increase production. After returning to MIT in the fall of 1965, Barry would be hit with devastating news just a short time later. On November 5th, his Uncle Lou, who had been at work in his office, had suddenly died of a brain aneurysm. He was just 41 years old. For Barry, it was like losing a father all over again. And there would barely be any time for mourning, because just 17 days later, his Aunt Beverly passed. 4 young boys lost their mother and father in the blink of an eye: Paul, Jeffrey, Carrie, and Dana. At just 22 years old, Barry wanted to take over as the general manager of Empire Labs for 2 months, in exchange for $3,000, a car, and be given the first opportunity to purchase any sale of the company. And even though the trustees turned down his proposal, Barry didn't give up. 2 years later, in 1967, after graduating from MIT, he and longtime friend Joel Olster submitted a formal offer to buy Empire Labs for $250,000. Thinking of the 4 sons that Lou and Beverly left behind, the trustees also wanted to preserve a portion of Empire Labs for them. Barry consented to an option agreement that said his cousins could work for Empire Labs when they turned 21, and could each buy up to 5% of the company's shares when they turned 23, as long as Barry still owned the business. If he were to sell it, however, that agreement would become void. Joel and Barry ran Empire Labs for nearly 5 years, and they did it successfully. By the end of 1972, sales had reached nearly $2 million a year. Then, in 1973, they sold Empire Labs for $2 million. Barry was gearing up for the next chapter, Apotex. Fearless, bold, up for anything, Honey Sherman had a big personality and a sense of humor to rival it. Growing up, like Barry, Honey's home life wasn't easy. Her mother ruled with an iron fist, and Honey bore the brunt of it. Both of Honey's parents were in Nazi slave camps during the war. Later, they were moved to a displaced persons camp in Austria, which is where Honey was born. Eventually, they made their way to Canada. Honey's parents opened a small shoe store on the west side of Toronto, and just like Barry's mother, her parents too rented out rooms in their house in order to make ends meet.
My parents were actually supposed to get off the train once they landed in Halifax and put on a train. They were supposed to actually go to Winnipeg. And thanks to what was the precursor to JIAS, the Jewish Immigrant Aid Service, someone who spoke Yiddish and or Polish came on the train and said, "Get off here. We will give you a job, we will give you a home, and we will take care of you." And that's what happened. And that's why we ended up here in Toronto. So I consider myself very fortunate as well.
In the early 1970s, after earning an arts degree from the University of Toronto and an education degree from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, Honey began volunteering as a candy striper at Toronto's Mount Sinai Hospital, where she became good friends with one of the nurses, a woman named Cindy. See, at the time, Cindy was married to Barry's best friend, Joel, and once Cindy introduced Honey to Barry, the rest was history. On July 2nd, 1971, they were married by a judge at the York County Courthouse. Launched in 1974, Apotex came out of the gates swinging. They were in constant battle mode against Big Pharma and government regulators. Barry considered himself an underdog and wasn't afraid to go toe-to-toe with huge pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Bayer, and Merck. He wanted to provide the public with cheaper generic options, and he wasn't going to let the giant pharmaceutical companies stop him, saying if we're thieves, we're Robin Hoods. Those who knew Barry best said he really wanted to make a difference. Barry felt that if you could make a drug in an original way, you should be free to sell it. By the 1990s, Apotex had grown to become Canada's largest generics firm, responsible for filling 1 in 5 domestic prescriptions, without going public or taking outside investment, leaving him in complete control. And his decisions paid off. By the time Barry and Honey were in their 40s, they were millionaires. Billionaires in their 50s. Even in his early years at Apotex, Barry was already dabbling in philanthropy, though he wasn't showy or boastful about it, preferring to be a quiet, behind-the-scenes donor. The Shermans gave away well over $100 million in their lifetime, donating to charities like the United Jewish Appeal and even shipping millions of dollars worth of medicine to disaster zones. Here's Honey in 2010 participating in a Dancing with the Stars fundraiser for Baycrest, a foundation that provides care for older adults.
3, 2, 3, once again.
I am stepping out of my comfort zone, but I'm willing to work hard to try to not fall flat on my face on the night of.
Focus. Focus.
My husband thinks I'm nuts for doing this.
I thought maybe she was joking because of her arthritis. She's had such difficulties in recent years, even walking.
1, 2, 3.
To think that she could take this on it was amazing to me. I didn't think she'd be up to it.
Okay, so we're gonna 1, 2. We have to practice a lot on her balance, and the good thing that she's really strong. Not that, honey, but
I'm putting all my faith in my dance instructor. He has to make me look fabulous, young, thin, capable, wonderful dancer. Vote for me!
it was good workout. She even make me sweat.
I was hot, I was sweaty, we learned a lot, and we're moving forward. We still have a long way to go, and we're gonna get there.
Around 1, 2.
She's enjoying it and certainly taking it seriously to make sure that she can do a good job.
While Barry was getting Apotex off the ground and running, Honey taught elementary school. They welcomed their first child, Lauren, in 1976. Because the couple had had such a hard time conceiving, they turned to surrogacy to help complete their family. In 1983, they welcomed their son, Jonathan, their daughter, Alexandra, in 1986, and finally, Kaylin in 1990. Now that we understand a bit more about who the Shermans were, I want to take you back to Friday, December 17th, 2017, the day the bodies were discovered. At 8:25 a.m. on Friday, December 17th, Nelia Makatange, the Sherman's housekeeper, arrives at the Sherman residence to begin her duties. And even though she couldn't put her finger on it at the time, something felt wrong. She later told friends and family that she could sense a heavy, black feeling in the air as she approached the home. As Nelia got out of her car and made her way to the front door, she noticed the morning newspaper was still outside. That's odd. Normally by this time, Barry was in the kitchen already reading it. At the same time, one of the Sherman's personal trainers, a woman named Megan Young, had also pulled up with Nelia. And as the two women entered the house, a white van from a furnace company pulled up too. The Sherman's home had 4 furnaces, and this was a scheduled service call. The furnace man followed the woman inside and headed into the basement with a set of tools. This is where Nelia notices something else was off. As she was unlocking the side door, she noticed the alarm system was set to off. In the 3 years she had worked for the Shermans, the alarm was never off. She heads upstairs to see if she can find Honey and Barry. She looks in the master bedroom, and while the bed was made, it still caught her attention because it wasn't made the way Honey normally made it. She wondered if it had even been slept in. From there, Nelia checked Barry's room. His bed was made up too, but again, not like how it usually was. Thinking the Shermans left a few days early for their Florida vacation, Nelia didn't think any more of it and got to work cleaning. Meanwhile, Megan, the Sherman's personal trainer, decided to wait a little longer in case Honey showed up. Eventually, the trainer left, and then the furnace repairman. As he walked out the door, a set of frozen footprints caught his attention on one side of the driveway leading down the ramp to the underground garage. It stood out to him because the driveway was heated, and he wondered if the heat was only working on one side of the ramp. Not thinking anything else of it, he got in his van and drove off. By this point, a handful of people had been trying to get in touch with the couple, including Honey's sister Mary, Barry's longtime assistant Joanne, and Jeremy Desai, the president and CEO of Barry's company. At 10:45 a.m., realtor Weidong Zhao and his clients, a couple from China, who were interested in purchasing a house in Canada, arrived at the Shermans' residence. A few minutes later, the Shermans' realtor, Elise Stern, arrived and walked in the front door. She had a quick chat with the housekeeper, Nelia, who told her the Shermans weren't home. Elise wasn't sure if she should reschedule or not, but since selling the house was a top priority for Honey, Elise made the decision to go ahead and proceed with the tour. You see, Honey wanted to sell their home so that she and Barry could move closer to their daughter Alexandria and their 2 grandchildren. After showing the couple around the upstairs, they then toured the main floor. That's when Elise found a cell phone sitting on the sink in the bathroom closest to the front door. Anybody that knew Honey immediately thought this was strange because Honey never used that bathroom. Earlier in the morning, while cleaning, the housekeeper found the phone on the floor in the bathroom. She picked it up and placed it on the vanity. Now, the housekeeper didn't think anything of it, but that seems surprising given all the circumstances. And people normally don't leave their phones on the floor. After touring the main floor, the group made their way to the lower level. In one of the front rooms in the basement, Elise noticed an open window, but it was only open a few inches, and the screen was still in place. She believed the Shermans had left it open to air out the smell of fresh paint. She also noticed the stairwell door that led up to the patio on the west side of the house was unlocked. The group made their way to the basement's family room, where some of their more peculiar art was on display. Most notably, 2 life-size figures that had been sculpted out of leftover metal, wood, and other scraps. Honey loved them. The rest of the family, not so much. The figures had a tendency to creep people out. At the end of the basement corridor, just outside the underground garage door, the homeowner's inspection report, Barry's leather driving gloves, and his BlackBerry were lying on the floor. Something Elise was annoyed to see. It wasn't a good look to prospective buyers who were being asked to pay millions. From there, the group made their way to the back of the house, where the sauna, storage area, and pool were located. The door to the pool was always locked, per residential swimming pool safety regulations. Elise pushed a red button to unlock the door and showed the group the small gym that lied just inside. From there, she opened a sliding glass door that led directly to the pool. Inside the pool room, it was completely dark, with the only light source coming from the underwater pool light, which in itself was strange because the pool cover was on. See, the Shermans hadn't used their pool for a while. In fact, it had been years since it was serviced, which is why the Shermans' one and only camera, which was in that pool room, was no longer functioning. As everyone's eyes began to adjust to the dim light, the other real estate agent, Mr. Zhao, motioned to something at the far end of the 45-foot-long room, asking, "What's that?" believing it was more weird art. The truth of the matter was, he couldn't have been more wrong. At the other end of the pool were the bodies of Barry and Honey Sherman, positioned side by side on the pool deck floor with their legs outstretched in a partially seated, partially reclined position, held up by belts that were looped around their necks and tied to a low metal railing. Barry's legs were casually crossed at the ankles, with the right one on top. His glasses were still on his face, and the jacket he was wearing was pulled back off his shoulders, preventing him from using his arms. Honey had dried blood on the right side of her face from a cut above her eye. Elise ushered the group out of the room and went and grabbed Nelia, the housekeeper, and Claire Banks, the gardener, to see if one of them would be willing to go downstairs and check on the Shermans. Surely this couldn't be real, right? It was as if Elise couldn't wrap her mind around what she had seen. Nelia, remembering that ominous feeling she had had earlier in the morning, began to freak out. Ultimately, it was Claire Banks, the gardener, who agreed to go downstairs and check on the Shermans. A few minutes later, she came back upstairs, declaring that they were dead, and by the looks of things, they had been for a while. The first call Elise made was to Honey's sister in Florida. The second call she made was to the police. Within minutes, the police, fire department, and paramedics were on the scene. Crime scene investigators were in the home taking pictures, while another group were outside inspecting Honey's SUV. At 7:20 p.m., the bodies were removed from the scene. All evidence pointed to a double murder, so you can imagine everyone's surprise when, on Friday evening, Detective Brandon Price told the media that police weren't looking for outside suspects. That could only mean one thing. One of them had taken the other's life, and then their own.
I just wanted to alleviate some concerns in the neighborhood. I know that an event such as this can be very concerning to the community, and I can say that at this point in the investigation, though it is very early, we are not currently seeking or looking for an outstanding suspect, and that's about all I can say with regard to that. The situation otherwise is the same. We will be getting a lot more answers tomorrow following the postmortem examinations. But I just want to put people in the area's minds at ease. I can say that we did not observe any signs of forced entry to the building, and so at this point, indications are that we have no outstanding suspect to be going after.
Those closest to Honey and Barry were outraged by the idea. The following day, the couple's 4 children issued a statement. We're shocked and think it's irresponsible that police sources have reportedly advised the media of a theory which neither their family, their friends, nor their colleagues believe to be true. And the idea did seem far-fetched. After all, they both had so much to live for. Upcoming trips, a new grandchild, the construction of their new home. What had investigators seen that would lead them to make that kind of call, and so quickly? What Detective Price didn't tell the media was that there had been break-ins in the area, leaving the locals feeling uneasy. In fact, just a year prior, robbers had entered the Shermans' home through their skylight. And while Detective Price's statement was meant to calm the fears of those in the Shermans' neighborhood, it wasn't necessarily a fair call to make. But the police held firm to their initial statement for the next 3 weeks. News outlets published articles painting Barry as the culprit. The day after the Shermans' bodies were found, Toronto police announced their cause of death: ligature neck compression. They had been strangled. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Pickup performed the autopsies, with homicide detectives present. And he did go to the Shermans' home while their bodies were there, something that's considered somewhat rare for pathologists to do. While the lead homicide detective assigned to the case, Sergeant Susan Gomes, didn't go to the crime scene until days later. Concerned that the Toronto police were out of their depths, Barry and Honey's children hired their own experts to sift through the evidence and conduct a second autopsy of the bodies. And they wanted it conducted by a pathologist from the United States. Ultimately, it would be Dr. David Chason who would perform them. The second autopsies would be done at the same location as the first. The day of the autopsies, 5 retired police investigators from the family's private team were there, along with Dr. Pickup, the forensic pathologist who performed the initial autopsies on Barry and Honey. As Dr. Chason carried out his work, a few things stood out to him. The first being that it was clear that the Shermans' wrists had been tied while they were still alive. This was evident from the tissue and blood vessel damage that only occurs if blood is still circulating throughout the body. But no ties were found at the scene. And remember, neither of their wrists were tied when they were found. This meant whoever tied their wrist cut the zip ties off and took them. The second thing he noticed was that both Barry and Honey's hyoid bones were still intact. It was once a long-standing belief that if the hyoid bone was snapped, it was indicative of a violent end. If it wasn't snapped, it was thought to be self-inflicted. But research has shown that's not always the case. And what's more is that Barry couldn't have taken his own life in the position he was found in. Dr. Chason believed all signs pointed to one thing: a double homicide, though they weren't able to determine who was killed first. On Thursday, December 21st, 2017, more than 7,000 people attended the Shermans' funeral to pay their respects, including Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Jonathan spoke about how his parents love to share their excitement about life with others.
We are taking some comfort in knowing that you two are together forever, and neither of you had to suffer like we are suffering now. You were like a lock and a key, each pretty useless on your own. But together, you unlocked the whole world for yourselves, and for us, and for so many others. We promise to carry on your legacy of greatness and giving from now until forever. To my father, you are my hero. And I don't mean that like how all dads are heroes to their sons. You were a real-life superhero. When I was a kid in elementary school, we did these book reports on great Canadians. And I would always choose someone like Wayne Gretzky or Terry Fox. I didn't know at that time that you were one of those types of people. You contributed enormously to so many fields and have received so many honors and awards. I could not begin to name them off. To me, each new award was just another in the pile, and no additional award was going to alter my perception of your greatness. But just 2 weeks ago, you privately told our family that you had been appointed to the Order of Canada, the greatest recognition of Canadian greatness. You were always so humble, but I know how proud you were to get that news, and how excited you were to finally be recognized for what you are. I don't know what will happen now with that award, if anything. But to our family, you were always the greatest Canadian.
The Mayor of Toronto paid tribute to the Shermans' dedication to bettering their city. Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne urged others to live as they did, full of compassion, hope, and generosity. Senator Linda Frum said it was a privilege to call the Shermans friends. But some onlookers couldn't help but feel that something was off with Jonathan's speech. It felt cold and transactional, not at all of someone who had just lost their parents, and in such a brutal way. On Friday, January 26, 2018, 6 weeks after the Shermans' bodies were discovered, police issued an update.
Thank you for all attending this news conference today. At 11:44 a.m. on Friday, December the 15th, 2017, we responded to a 911 call to 50 Old Colony Road. Officers attended the address and located Barry Sherman and Honey Sherman, deceased. Post-mortem examinations were conducted at the province's coroner's office forensic pathology unit by a forensic pathologist. The cause of death for both Shermans was ligature neck compression. From the outset of this investigation, we have followed the evidence, and we were alive to the issue of an undetermined manner of death. The integrity of every homicide investigation is paramount. Facts guide our focus. Conjecture and speculation have no place. Each of the three manners, the options provided to us, were all equally considered as evidence presented itself. As a unit, with the assistance of many other areas of expertise within our service, we have so far spent thousands of hours on this investigation. Our partners include the province's coroner's office forensic pathology unit and many areas of discipline within the Centre of Forensic Sciences. We are in the process of attaining or have executed 20 judicial authorizations and searches. Legal complexities in some executions have been challenging, given the litigious nature of Barry Sherman's businesses, in particular the search and seizure of electronics in Barry Sherman's workspace at Apotex. 2 residential properties belonging to the Shermans have been searched. The primary Sherman residence is a 3-story family dwelling of a size warranting 6 weeks of searching, forensic review, and seizing of evidence. This morning, we returned the residence to the family. To date, close to 150 bulk or packaged items have been seized and are currently being reviewed and forensically analyzed. A total of 127 witness statements have been compiled, and this number continues to grow each day. Neighborhood canvasses have occurred in the area surrounding the Sherman residence. This has included the collection of approximately 4 terabytes of security video from both commercial and residential properties. There are approximately 500 hours in each of these terabytes. And finally, 348 investigative actions have been assigned and are being vigorously pursued. Contact with the immediate Sherman family has been consistent and ongoing. What we have come to learn so far in our investigation that I'm willing to confirm with you today is that Honey and Barry Sherman were last seen alive in the evening hours of Wednesday, December the 13th, 2017. Neither of the two had communicated with friends, family, or associates from that time frame until their discovery on Friday, December the 15th. There are no signs of forced entry on all access points to the home. Honey and Barry Sherman were found deceased in the lower level pool area, hanging by belts from a poolside railing in a semi-seated position. We believe now, through the 6 weeks of work review, we have sufficient evidence to describe this as a double homicide investigation, and that both Honey and Barry Sherman were in fact targeted.
They confirmed that Honey and Barry were last seen alive on the evening of Wednesday, December 13th, 2017. So, 2 days before their bodies were found. December 13th also appeared to be when communication to family, friends, and associates had ceased. Police stated that there was no signs of forced entry on any of the access points to the Shermans' home. And then Sergeant Susan Gomes dropped a bomb. They were reclassifying the case as a double homicide. And not only that, they believed that Honey and Barry were targeted. Here's what we know about the couple's last remaining days. On Wednesday, December 13th, Denise Gold, one of the Shermans' personal trainers, showed up at the house for their scheduled workouts. It was 8:30. Barry was up first. He and Denise ate breakfast together before heading up to the small gym attached to the master bedroom. Barry's workout was done by 9:30, and Honey was up next. Because Honey had a host of issues including back, shoulder, hip, and knee operations, her sessions were 2 hours. By this point, the Shermans' realtor, a cleaner, and 2 handymen were downstairs getting things ready for a showing that was scheduled later that day. At 10 a.m., Barry left in his Ford Mustang. Their trainer, Denise, said that there were no signs that anything was amiss, telling police that both of the Shermans were in great moods and that she didn't sense any tension between them. After her training session, Honey had a 2-hour massage scheduled with their masseuse, Josie. Once that was finished, she got ready for the day and left to do some holiday shopping. Meanwhile, Barry was at Apotex, meeting with Jeremy Desai, the company's CEO, and 2 of its in-house lawyers, to discuss ways they could settle with a company that they were locked in a legal battle with. They agreed to meet the following day to finish up discussions. Honey arrived at Apotex around 5 o'clock to meet with Barry and 3 builders from Brennan Custom Homes to go over plans for their $30 million mansion that was to be built in Forest Hill, a village north of Toronto where Barry had grown up. At 6:15, security cameras in the building show Honey and the builders leaving separately. Shortly after, she accidentally pocket-dialed one of the builders. The call lasted about 20 seconds before ending. After leaving Apotex, Honey drove to the Bayview Village Mall. On the drive over, at 6:21 p.m., she phoned a friend to see how her husband, who had just undergone an operation, was doing. From what we know, this appears to be the last time anyone would hear from her. Honey arrived at Bayview around 7 p.m. She visited a cosmetics store and then used a bank's ATM. Police would later find $7,500 in her wallet. Because the Shermans lived less than 10 minutes from Bayview, Honey most likely arrived home just before 8 p.m. We know that Barry was still at Apotex at 8 p.m. as he had sent an email from his computer there at 8:12. The last email he would ever send went out at 8:23. Those close to Barry said it wasn't uncommon for Barry to be at the office until 10 o'clock some nights. On the night of Wednesday, December 13th, however, Barry left around 8:30, which would put him home before 9. It's believed the murders took place between 9 and 10 that evening. Over the next 36 hours, the couple received multiple emails and phone calls, all which went unanswered, with the first missed call taking place at 9:01 p.m. from a lawyer named Doug Hendler. At 9:49, Barry gets an email from Jack Kay, his second-in-command at Apotex. The following morning at 9:02 a.m., Honey receives a call from a friend. At 11:19 a.m., Elise Stern, the Shermans' real estate agent, calls to confirm a Friday morning showing. At 12:34 p.m., Barry gets an email from their son Jonathan, inviting him to his company's Christmas party the following Monday. At 1:04 p.m., Elise Stern calls again. She then emails Barry at 1:13, letting him know that 2 showings are scheduled for Friday. At 9:53 a.m. on Friday, Honey receives a call from their cleaning lady in Florida. At 10:06 a.m., the Shermans' daughter Alexandria sends an email reminding her parents about their dinner plans for later that evening. At 10:16, their youngest daughter Kaylin calls Barry. 2 minutes later, she tries again. At that same time, Lauren, their oldest daughter, is also trying to contact Barry. Lauren, who was in Mexico on vacation, had learned that her car was broken into, and she was hoping Barry could help her take care of it while she was out of the country. At 11 o'clock, Jeremy Desai, the CEO of Apotex, emails Barry about one of their plants in India. One theory police have is that Honey was attacked shortly after arriving home. We know that she had enough time to put on her house shoes and take off her coat. Honey's iPhone was found in the powder room at the front of the house, a room Honey never used. Is it possible she tried to lock herself in that room and call for help? Barry's car was in the underground garage. That means he most likely entered the home through the basement. It's believed that after Honey was subdued, she was taken downstairs so that they could all wait for Barry to arrive. Because Barry's winter gloves, the home inspection report, and his BlackBerry were found at the end of the hallway, it's thought that he was attacked as soon as he entered the basement hallway. And unlike Honey, he didn't have time to take off his coat. At some point, the Shermans were moved to the pool room. Investigators find what appear to be drag marks on the floor tile. They also find scuff marks on the back of Honey's shoes, leading them to theorize that the killer or killers must have dragged her into the pool room. At 11:44 on Friday, Elise Stern would make her frantic call to 911 after discovering the bodies. "10 months after their parents were killed, their children announced they're offering a reward of up to $10 million for information leading to the apprehension and prosecution of those responsible for taking their parents' lives."
For the family, the most perplexing and upsetting aspect of the investigation was the failure to recognize the obvious, that the bodies of Barry and Honey Sherman were staged post-mortem in a very deliberate manner. This entire process has caused needless additional pain and suffering to the Sherman family. As was stated earlier, the Sherman family understands the pressures and responsibilities that are placed upon the Toronto Police Service. Regrettably, it has become clear to them that despite the active pursuit of search warrants and exploring other investigative avenues, police resources have neither been properly managed nor effectively utilized. Therefore, as this new initiative, as an attempt to reignite an investigation, the Sherman family has asked me to announce the offer of a reward of up to $10 million for information leading to the apprehension and prosecution of those responsible for the murders of Honey and Barry Sherman. A call center has been established to collect tips and information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It will be live monitored from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily and monitored by voice message overnight. The leads will be analyzed and vetted, and any meaningful information will be conveyed immediately to the Toronto Police Service.
The family felt the police failed to properly examine and assess the crime scene, failed to recognize that it was staged. The police had a duty to maintain certain professional standards in their approach to the investigation, and failed to do so. The Sherman children wanted to make one thing very clear. They were cooperating with the police and didn't intend to hinder their investigation, only to enhance their efforts, support them, and offer additional resources. But some people did have a problem with the tip line going directly to the Shermans' private team and not the police. That meant the Shermans' team would be vetting the tips and relaying information that they felt was pertinent. But what else did the police get wrong? Well, according to the Shermans' private team, police failed to notice that the front door lock had been broken. They also failed to notice that one of the side doors in the home was unlocked, and a window in the basement was open. And that wasn't all. Police also failed to fingerprint people who were at Barry and Honey's home the day they were last seen and the day their bodies were discovered. In fact, they didn't fingerprint Denise Gold, the personal trainer at the home the morning they were last seen, until 9 months later. The Shermans' private team also claimed that police missed more than 20 palm or fingerprint impressions at the scene. If that wasn't bad enough, crime scene technicians didn't vacuum the pool deck floor in order to obtain microscopic evidence. And while police did gather 4 terabytes worth of video footage from commercial and residential security cameras around the Shermans' home, they missed the house directly across the road from the Shermans. A year passed and no arrests had been made. In May of 2019, the Sherman children got permission to knock down their parents' home on Old Colony Road. And then, new information was obtained from the neighbors across the street. You see, they had noticed a strange car parked right outside of Honey and Barry's home the day before the bodies were discovered. The next day, seeing all the police activity across the road, the neighbors offered up their security footage to officers, but were basically brushed aside. The neighbors attempted to hand over the footage a second time, knowing that their cameras were on a 7-day loop before the footage would start getting taped over. Again, police brushed them off. By the time investigators finally got around to obtaining the footage, 3 days from the previous week had been lost. So what exactly was on the neighbor's video? Well, listen to this. Their cameras had captured a man appearing to go in and out of the Shermans' home. At times, he would sit in his car for up to 15 minutes before heading back towards the door. When Toronto Star reporter Kevin Donovan sat down with the neighbors, he learned that they personally had only looked at Thursday's footage, and police were tight-lipped over what was on Wednesdays. But here's what we know from the neighbors. At 9:11 a.m. on Thursday morning, a 4-door sedan pulls up right in front of the Shermans' home. It stays parked at the curb for just over an hour. During that time, a man is seen getting out of the car on 3 separate occasions and heading towards the Shermans' front door. Eventually, he drives off. Now, the footage is too grainy to make out any details on the man or get a license plate number, but this discovery was interesting nonetheless. However, when police were questioned about the man, they insisted that they already knew why he was there. It's been theorized that the man was a plainclothes police officer, canvassing the neighborhood from a prior missed 911 call from the area. It seemed like police were behind the ball on this case, taking their time to fingerprint, interview, and investigate key people. They also waited almost 2 months to follow up on a tip from Honey's lawyer. You see, about a month before the murders, Honey had updated her will. Upon hearing that the Shermans had been found dead, Honey's advisor immediately reached out to law enforcement, believing that this was pertinent information that they should know. And it did sound suspicious, kind of like when someone updates or takes out a new insurance policy and then something happens. In December of 2021, on the 4th anniversary of Barry and Honey's deaths, police released video of an unidentified person they dubbed the Walking Man, and they believe he's responsible for the Shermans' deaths, believing that he could even be a hitman. Now, the Shermans themselves didn't have video cameras outside their property, but like I said earlier, the neighbors did. Police say the unidentified man walks into the area not covered by cameras and remains there for some time before leaving. In the video, the man is shown heading east away from the Shermans. Police believe he's between 5'6" and 5'9". The only other thing that stood out was the way the man walked. He slightly kicked back his right foot with each step. Other than his height and walk, not much else was known. He could have been an older man, but it was also possible that it was a disguise. Once police reclassified the case, they began collecting video footage from the neighborhood in hopes of figuring out who the Walking Man was.
It's the most significant piece of evidence I think that's been released to date, at least in terms of soliciting tips from the public. I mean, one of the things that has bogged this case down for years has been the plethora of theories and potential motives. And it runs the gamut from some kind of murder for hire to something more rudimentary and personally motivated. So calling this individual a suspect, which is significant, that's not just a subtle distinction in semantics. To go from person of interest, which would include everybody potentially caught on CCTV, at bookending times of the murder, but to go from that to suspect confirms, one, that they haven't been able to locate and exclude this individual or clear this individual, and two, that they have reason to believe that this person has some direct involvement. A lot of stock is being put in this very unique idiosyncratic gait or stride that we see in the video. The hope, of course, being that if this is a legitimate feature, maybe from an injury, it may have since resolved itself, but if someone in the public can say, I know someone about that height who around that time had, a sprained ankle, or was recovering from a sprained ankle and walked with that hitch. That's significant. And at that point, police can locate that individual ideally and see what connection they had to the Shermans. We don't know the gender of this person. We don't know the age of this person. We don't know what they look like. All we have is this, again, idiosyncratic stride that seems to be maybe due to an injury or due to something else. When you have sort of a unique characteristic like this, and you can share that with the public, and you have nothing else really to go on, it seems, it can be very effective. This individual has eluded, some of the most experienced homicide detectives for 4 years. They obviously went to great lengths to conceal their face and took other steps to avoid being identified. It would seem that you cannot rule out the possibility that this then defining telltale feature isn't some kind of misdirect or subterfuge. One of the theories, obviously, behind it is that we're dealing with a very sophisticated, experienced offender, referred to actually by the Supreme Court as an assassin.
None of the residents that were spoken to could recognize the man. And what's weirder yet is that after this image, he isn't seen on video anywhere else. But still, where does the walking man go? A person can't just disappear into thin air. Was he picked up by an accomplice? Perhaps he walked to a car parked in the area and drove off. Maybe he walked to the nearest bus stop and jumped on the last bus for the night, which would have been at 10:30 p.m. for that area. We'll never know for sure, though, because the Toronto Transit Commission deletes their videos after 72 hours due to privacy concerns. Police sat on the video of the walking man for 4 years, claiming that it took time to collect, analyze the footage, and figure out a timeline for the suspect. Investigators say he's the killer, or one of the killers. They believe the suspect enters the Shermans' residence through the property of another neighbor's home that backed up to the Shermans. They believe he hops the fence into the Shermans' property, walks past the tennis court, the outdoor pool, and enters the home through a patio door. They also believe he was in communication with another individual. But who would really want to see Honey and Barry Sherman killed? Well, it turns out, a lot. When all was said and done, detectives had compiled a list of more than 300 phone numbers from anyone they had interviewed, including family, friends, business associates, and even people who didn't care for Honey or Barry. After that, they got court orders to analyze phone calls and texts near Old Colony Road the night the Shermans were murdered. And yet, police still came up empty-handed. Searches on Barry's BlackBerry, Honey's iPhone, iPads, and a desktop computer from the home seemingly turned up nothing of importance, as was the case with property seized from Apotex, though police had a much harder time getting access to files owned by Barry's company as they revealed confidential trade secrets. In the months leading up to his death, Barry was locked in a vicious court battle with his cousin. Remember his uncle Lou Winters and how he left behind 4 sons? Well, those sons believed that Barry owed them a stake in Apotex because it was founded with proceeds from their late father's business. And even though Barry had financially supported them throughout their lives, Lou's sons claimed that it wasn't out of kindness, but rather to keep them from trying to go after Apotex. Things started unraveling when one of Lou's sons came across papers from back in the 1960s, when Barry was in talks to purchase Empire Labs, including the cause about options for Lou's children. One of Lou's sons would argue in court that they should be entitled to a 1/5 share in Apotex, saying that without Empire Labs, there'd be no Apotex. But the judge didn't see it that way, even going as far as to call it wishful thinking. In essence, the option agreement became null and void when Barry sold Empire Labs. In the fall of 2017, the judge ruled in Barry's favor, and, to add insult to injury, he ordered Lou's son to pay Barry $300,000 in legal fees. Not only that, Barry called in his loans, which amounted to more than $8 million. His cousin had to sell his house and cottage to pay up. Barry severed ties with his cousins, along with any financial support he had provided them. You see, for a number of years, Barry had had a close relationship with Lou's sons. He helped fund their business ventures and bought them houses, giving them roughly $15 million over the years. He even helped Lou's sons battle their drug addictions by paying for their treatments.
I did everything I could to help them, even to start their own businesses. With Carrie here, I said to him, asked him, what is it you want to do, Carrie? You got to make something out of yourself. He said he wanted to do renovations. I said, fine, I'll finance a renovations business for you. Get some training, buy a property, work on it.
As one friend put it, Barry derived pleasure from helping others build lives for themselves. It's been speculated that perhaps Lou's sons, enraged over the judge's ruling, took matters into their own hands. When it comes to the Winter family, that isn't all. One of Lou's sons claims that Barry had confided in him that he was unhappy in his marriage to Honey. So much so that in the 90s, Barry approached him about wanting help taking out Honey, but eventually decided not to go through with it. When Lou's son suggested he just divorce Honey, he said that Barry couldn't stand the idea of Honey getting half of his money. Obviously, there's no way to verify these claims. Now, back when police were still pursuing the murder-suicide theory, detectives spoke to Lauren, Barry and Honey's oldest child. She told police that while her parents did sometimes yell and scream, things never got physical between them, going on to say that their marriage had actually improved over the years. Every family has their own troubles, and it's no secret the Shermans had their own. The relationship Honey had with her children was at times strained. Over the years, Honey had confided in her friends that she often felt controlled by her son and daughters. Barry was typically seen as a softer parent, and there was often strife over how much Barry helped them. Then there was the matter of Honey not being accepting of the lives her children chose to live. When their son Jonathan came out as gay, it was something Honey found difficult to accept, so much so that Jonathan's partners often felt unwelcomed. Then there was the matter of who would take over Apotex. In emails dating back to the early 2000s, it appeared that none of the Sherman children were interested. Lauren even felt her father had amassed too much wealth, saying, "I think that having produced too much money is a big part of your problem. Perhaps it's time to slow down at work and start spending time nurturing loving relationships with your kids. On your deathbed, I doubt that you'll be thinking, gosh, I wish I had another $1 billion. To add to an already difficult family dynamic, about a year after Honey and Barry were murdered, their children would begin to turn on one another. Alexandria, the second youngest child of Honey and Barry, started to suspect that her brother Jonathan may have had something to do with their parents' death. Listen to this. About a year before the murders, a court had ordered Barry to pay the drug company AstraZeneca nearly $600 million. Rumors circulated that it put Barry in a tough spot financially. He would need to pay that judgment in January of 2018. Remember, Honey and Barry were murdered in December of 2017, so a month prior. On at least 2 separate occasions, Barry had asked Jonathan and his business partner to begin repaying $50 million Barry had given them. The theory was that this gave Jonathan motive for murder. Now, Jonathan claims that this was just his dad acting in the heat of the moment. He was asking for his money back, but he didn't really intend to carry through with it. Could asking for $50 million be motive enough for murder? According to Jonathan, no. He even doubled down, saying he and his father were in a good place and that his dad was his #1 supporter. Even going as far as to pay $329,000 to cover the cost of 2 surrogate births so that Jonathan and his husband could start a family. And, get this, Barry made the final payment the morning he was murdered. Lauren and Caitlin sided with their sister. Then there were disagreements over the role Jonathan and his business partner wanted in Barry's company. Jonathan has insisted that investigators need to look at other people closer to Barry, including Jack Kay, Barry's friend and second-in-command at Apotex, and Frank D'Angelo, one of Barry's longtime business partners. Barry and Frank met in the early 2000s, and over the years partnered in a variety of business ventures, including a beer company, restaurants, and a number of B-list movies written, directed, and starring Frank. Jonathan suspected both men were after Barry's money, but it just doesn't make sense. How would killing Barry get them more money? In fact, after Barry died, Frank lost all of his businesses, and Jack Kay was let go from Apotex a year later. While not everyone close to the Shermans benefited from their death, there are certainly those who did. 4 people became billionaires practically overnight. Their children. Barry and Honey were estimated to be worth over $4.5 billion, though some say it was really more like 10. 3 years after the murders, documents were unsealed explaining how the Sherman estate would be divided. It would be split equally between their 4 children. But there was also another clause in there that led some to speculate about the nature of Barry and Honey's deaths. In the event that Honey and Barry died, their estate would be divided equally among their children. But if Barry died, Honey would inherit almost everything. And it was well known that Honey thought Barry was too generous when it came to their children. At the end of the day, it's clear that there are no shortage of suspects. Trying to figure out who murdered this couple is like playing a game of Clue. I don't think it was a hitman for hire situation. It's too personal. A hitman could have easily gunned the Shermans down, but that's not what happened. Whoever killed Honey and Barry, it was personal. They were strangled, moved, posed. Honey was punched, or at the very least, hit with something in the face. We know that one of Lou Winter's sons had just lost a nasty court battle with Barry in which they were seeking $1 billion. They didn't get the outcome they wanted, and they were ordered to pay Barry's legal fees. The judge ruled on the matter just a week before the Shermans were murdered. If not the Winter boys, then perhaps Jonathan. After all, his father was asking for $50 million, and his sisters felt that he was a loose cannon, dangerous even. If it wasn't family, perhaps it was a business grudge. He was locked in numerous legal battles with companies like Teva, a pharmaceutical rival of Apotex. Then there was the random business investments that soured, like the app Trivia for Good. Except, here's the thing, there was no app. Instead, the founder, Sean Rutenberg, was actually scamming women out of their money. Once Barry found out, he went after Sean in court, and this was mere weeks before the murder. Still, it feels like more than just a business grudge. It's like whoever did this knew Honey and Barry's schedule well, knew that Wednesday would be the perfect time to get the job done. According to Honey's personal assistant, the Shermans didn't typically schedule things on Thursdays, meaning whoever planned this knew the bodies likely wouldn't be found for at least a day. When nobody heard from Honey or Barry on Thursday, most thought it was odd, but not suspicious enough to sound the alarm. And I think we can all relate. With everybody's lives as busy as they are, not hearing from someone for a day is easy to brush off. Around the 5th anniversary of their parents' murders, Jonathan increased the reward for information, bringing it to a whopping $35 million, telling news outlets that closure wouldn't be possible until those who are responsible are brought to justice. The conspiracies run deep with this case, but there's one constant. Every theory involves money. Some say Big Pharma finally had enough of Barry's lawsuits. Then there are those that hint at the Russian mob being involved over a supply of fentanyl, or that Barry had predicted a worldwide pandemic and that he was killed for his supply of hydroxychloroquine. Still, 7 years later, the question remains, who's responsible for their deaths? It's baffling to think that in 2024, people can still get away with murder. 2 teams of investigators combing through thousands of hours of video footage, looking into 1,000+ tips, executing more than 40 search warrants, interviewing more than 300 people, taking more than 1,000 investigative actions. No arrests have been made. Whoever did this is either the luckiest person in the world, or they truly covered their tracks? I know that I've given you a lot to unpack today, but I cannot wait to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the Sherman case? Who do you think is responsible for taking their lives? If you appreciated today's video, give it a thumbs up, and hey, while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on the next investigation.